maybe go, first through, how you got to know the company, how you got interested in it. And I know it was a bit of a process. It wasn't,
Yeah,
one meeting and all of a sudden there's a deal.
yeah.
Yeah. So maybe start
I
with
wish it
that.
were that easy. So, I mean, going back, I think I can trace the roots of our investment in Zoom to Emergence's thematic approach. As you know, we're not a generalist firm. We focus, we call the future we think is going to happen. And then once we develop that conviction, we go and meet with the companies that we feel are building for that future. Initially, that was just SaaS, and the thesis was that software was going to move from on-prem servers to the cloud before it was obvious. And people laughed at us, and that's when we invested in Salesforce, and people laughed at that as well. But now that has created an incredible industry. So if you fast forward that a few years, we started seeing collaboration and how the tools that were developed in that first generation of the cloud were not innovating enough to catch up with market demands. And those market demands were, I mean, people wanted a tool that they loved, not something that the CIO said, this is what we mandate everyone has to use. So the go-to-market changed from enterprises making decisions and forcing people to use a tool that they didn't want to people using something they loved, and then enterprises embracing that. Plus the shifts in devices that people were using. People were not just sitting in front of a computer hardwired to the internet. They were using multiple devices, switching from being hardwired to Wi-Fi to cell phone network. And a lot of the old school collaboration tools were not designed for that. So that's what pushed us to explore and identify something different. It took us about 3 years to come across Zoom. We talked to other companies. You might remember a company called DimDim. They were in the video conferencing space back in the days. So that was one of the first that I remember when I joined Emergence. They had a great product, but they were not quite there. And since then, we've been meeting with every other company. And as part of this market map, we came across Zoom. And that's when I say that it's almost like a textbook case of how diversity can generate real returns. Because when people didn't see that there was a need for another video conferencing company, we had investments outside of the Bay Area. By that time, we had invested in a company called Insightly that were not in the US. And we were using other products to communicate with them. They were not working. And I'm from Argentina. So my friends, family, community, they were all in Argentina. So that's why I was always looking for something. And when I tried Zoom to communicate with our companies, which were not in the US, and my friends and family in Argentina, I could see that it wasn't just a little bit better, it was more than 10x better than everything else. And I remember doing diligence and talking to other people here in the Bay Area, and the answer was like, there's no room for another video conferencing company. I use the existing players and they work fine. Of course, they work fine when you're talking from your office in Palo Alto to someone in San Francisco, because it's all a pretty controlled environment. But when you start going outside of that bubble, that's when you started seeing that the applications were not cut out for that. So that's why, for me, it's like diversity at its best. It's like our background with me having that exposure growing up in Argentina enabled me to see that Zoom was different. And that's when we reached out to Eric and we tried to build a relationship. And Eric's response was, I mean, we were not raising. I mean, we're doing okay. We're just trying to find new customers. And I asked him, so Eric, can you come in, give us a pitch? I was a junior investment professional at the time. So I had to gain support from my partners to make an investment. And Eric says, like, we're not raising. We don't have a pitch. So then we started building relationship, and I said, look, we want to switch to Zoom. I told him we bought a Skype camera. There were some devices that were cameras with Skype embedded, and we don't like it. It doesn't work. And Eric said, okay, I need to tell you how to get this done. I'm going to show up at your office so that you can become a Zoom customer. And that was the reason why he came in, and he pitched us not the company, but the product. And he took a big risk in that meeting. It's like 10 people sitting at a table. He said, okay, everyone, let's do a live demo, download the Zoom app, and let's launch a Zoom meeting. And you know that those are really risky when you try to do that with a group of people. And it worked. First time, it worked. Everyone was, and this was back in, I don't know, 2013, 2014. So it was very early days of Zoom. And that's what got us excited as a group, that this was the thing that we had been looking for years. And that's when we started building a deeper relationship with Eric. We started understanding what the company was, what he wanted the company to be. And over the next few months, we built a very strong relationship that ended up becoming the genesis of this partnership and eventually the investment.
So there was no investor deck.
There was no investment. There were no financials. There was no data room. They were just like going at it, like selling and delivering happiness, even back in the days. And I remember when we said, okay, we want to make something work here. He gave us complete access to everything. And he said, I don't have a pitch deck. I don't have like a well-built financial model, but you can access all the data. And it was like opening the fire hose of data, unstructured data, and we had to make sense of that data. And once we started looking into the data, we were blown away because we had seen great companies in our history, but we had never seen something as capital efficient as Zoom was even back then.
Wow. So I think the other thing you mentioned when we last met was that, given that what you've already said before, is like, why does the world need another video conferencing system? And, your job after you invest, it's not just, that's it. You got to get some more investment. Convincing other people to come along was not, it sounded like what you said for me was this was the hardest deal to do that with.
Yes, I mean, it was really hard. So we invested, I think it was the back end of 2014. And after we invested, we said, okay, this might turn into a capital intensive model. If you looked at all the other video conferencing companies out there or collaboration, like broader collaboration companies, they took a lot of money, not necessarily to build a product, but to push the product into these large enterprises. So we assumed that as we're going to go up into enterprises from SMB and mid-market to enterprises, we're going to have to hire a bigger sales team, and that was going to cost a lot of money. So we were concerned that this company was going to require a lot of capital. And for us, we invested out of a smaller fund. It was a $250 million fund. And we wrote a $20 million initial check, which was the biggest check we've ever written. So it was like nerve-wracking, especially for me as someone new in this industry. So I thought, we wrote this huge check. We didn't get the ownership that we wanted because we typically are targeting 20% when we invest in companies. Here, we had to write a much bigger check and we had to get a lot less ownership. So it was stressful. And I was trying to find people to believe in this vision and to understand that this was different. People wouldn't even take the meeting. People were like, oh no, I talked to my partners and they got burned with video conferencing. We're not touching it, which was also instructional for me as I was new in venture, because I learned that there are cycles and people have these biases, and sometimes these biases prevent them from seeing that the world has changed. And now with the pandemic, everyone sees that the world has changed, but it's always changing. So you always need to push yourself to see, okay, what if there's something different? And those biases end up costing people a lot of money.
Um, yeah, and so Erica, I've met Eric a few times. Definitely a very impressive person. Uh, and obviously you spent so much more time with him. What is it about him? If I'm an entrepreneur and I want to learn something from Eric, what would it be that I could learn from him?
So we had the privilege of working with great entrepreneurs. And I'd say Eric is one of those very special individuals. First, he has this ability to see the future. So he sees what the world will need before the world even says they need that. And that's unique. And it reminds me a lot of like Steve Jobs and the iPod and then the iPhone. It's like people don't even know they need this. But once they see it, they'll fall in love. So Eric has some of that. And he's a much nicer version of Steve Jobs, but he sees the future and he saw that voice was old school and video was going to be the new voice. And the way I think about that, if you track how communications happen over time, initially it was just face to face. If you were not face to face with someone, you couldn't exchange anything, you couldn't communicate. And then we started getting efficiencies, and it's like, oh, we're going to send letters, and we're going to write emails, we're going to use a phone. But those were crutches to the real in-person communication until Zoom happened. And that created that full experience. And I do believe that long term, this is going to be much better than in person. Because, and we can talk about that later, but think about the augmented reality wave a few years ago where everyone's saying, oh, you're going to use this Google glasses and you're going to start getting a lot of information, but then those Google glasses were clunky and people didn't use them and you ran out of battery. This is augmented reality. So this is the digital representation of a conversation. I'm not wearing Google glasses, but I could still see a lot of cards popping up. It's like, oh, you just said this, and Tom just rolled his eyes, so he doesn't believe. I could get all that augmented reality on top of this window that's Zoom. But anyway, going back to Eric, he sees around corners. He truly cares, and he does the right thing over the best thing. We see a lot of entrepreneurs who are always trying to optimize. What's the best thing for me as a company, as a vendor? How do I extract all the value from this customer? How do I extract all the value from my employees? Eric doesn't think like that. He thinks about what's the right thing to do for my employees, for my customers, for my investors, for my community. And he doesn't just say it because it's cool to say that you care. He truly cares. He acts, and then he doesn't even advertise what he's done. It's not that he wants people to know what he's doing. And I sometimes get impressed when I find out about stuff that he's doing, and he hasn't even communicated that. He doesn't do it for the credit. He does it because he cares about it. Then the other thing that I see Eric doing is he works incredibly hard. And that's not just now when the world needs Eric to be working incredibly hard. He's always worked incredibly hard. He's one of those people where I sent him a note, like a Zoom chat. I mentioned I have a 1-month-old baby. I sent him a Zoom chat at 2 a.m. when I'm taking care of the baby. He responds right away. It's like we have an earnings call and I send him something, responds right away. And it's not just me, it's everyone. And it's not a bot, it's not a chief of staff, it's the real Eric engaging with the people he cares about. And for me, that's fascinating because even now, he's working around the clock and he does want to do the right thing. So the combination of that ability to see the future, that commitment to doing the right thing, plus this incredibly hard work ethics makes him one of those special leaders.
You mentioned kind of the leverage of video and these interactions and so forth, and detecting information from that and maybe insights. Another company you invested in, Chorus, uh,
Yeah.
you know, takes that type of information and provides insights to salespeople. And with so much more being done on Zoom, it seems like these types of services, these data AI services, are kind of taking this all to another level. You maybe talk about what you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, I mean, for the first time with Zoom, you can capture the real-time interaction, and you can capture not just the content, but also the context. And that's why we believe that Zoom itself and other companies are going to build on top of this new augmented reality platform to deliver better solutions for people. Think about um, education. Now Zoom is being used for education almost everywhere. And if I'm the teacher or the professor and I have a class and I'm explaining a new concept, this virtual reality platform, Zoom, could tell me, oh, you just lost Tom and you just lost 30% of the class. These people, like blinking in red, are people who are not getting it because they have this weird expression that based on our data bank, we know that means I don't get it. So then it's like send an automatic note to the TA. It's like reach out to Tom and double click on what he's not understanding. Because if he doesn't get this, then as we keep on moving forward, we're going to lose him. And for me, that's what's going to make humanity better, because we're going to be able to get all those signals, process them in real time, and provide a feedback that closes the loop. So I believe, and that's the optimist in me as an entrepreneur, is that Zoom is going to level up humanity and it's going to make us better over time.
Given that you're a thematic investor, a lot has happened since we last met last year at Zoomtopia, I think it was. What are the themes that Emergence is looking at right now? What gets your firm excited about investing in?
So you know that, I mean, we're spending a lot of time looking at coaching networks, industry cloud, and deskless workforce. One of the minor themes where we're spending a lot of time on, and that's a newer theme for us, is the set of applications that are going to be built on top of Zoom. And here we have some experience because early on, when we invested in Salesforce, we saw how that app exchange was enabling people to build applications that were specific for verticals or domains. And that's why we invested in this company called Viva Systems, which was built on top of Salesforce. They're now a $40 billion plus company. If you take that analogy and say Salesforce was mostly being used by salespeople, and that enabled a $40 billion company to emerge, focusing on life sciences. Think of Zoom. Zoom is being used by everyone. Imagine what could be built on top of Zoom that could be the Viva of Zoom. And we're seeing a lot of that. Zoom launched a marketplace and people are building on the API. So we believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, multiple Vivas are going to emerge on top of Zoom. And that's going to make Zoom better, and it's going to make Zoom's customers better, because Zoom can provide the platform. But then when you go deep in a specific domain, you need someone to tie the knot and do all those additional features that domain needs. And that's what gets us really excited, because we saw this movie play out, and we're seeing a similar pattern now.
I think you also Zoom, along with maybe Sequoia, or in your firm, had a venture contest to stir some innovation on the platform. And is that something that worked out and something you're going to do in the future?
Yes. Yeah. So we did, back in the days, we did it with Salesforce, and we identified a small company called ServiceMax, which ended up becoming a big company and then ended up selling for about $1 billion. So we basically reused that playbook, and we ran a competition on the marketplace. We saw a lot of interesting companies. We saw companies that were taking Zoom and making it better for telemedicine. We saw companies that were taking Zoom and making it better for education. We saw some companies that were building around Zoom to make the meeting experience more interesting. So for example, if you and I are chatting and we need to be taking notes, sometimes taking those notes could be distracting. But if someone, the technology could take notes and make sense of those notes automatically, that'll be great. And then the next time we connect, those notes pop up and you can follow up on those notes. And we saw a lot of companies doing that. And then we saw a lot of companies targeting these small businesses, which are now understanding how Zoom can enable them to scale. If you think of a yoga studio, they were constrained by the size of their studio and by their local audience. And that's, that's how much they could grow. Now they were forced to shut down their studios, explore new things. They discovered Zoom. They realized that Zoom enables them to get audiences all over the world at any time. So they can be the best at something very specific and get a much broader audience. But then they need to get paid for that. So they need to use a third-party app for that. They need to manage their CRM. So that's a huge opportunity for someone to help them run their businesses, Zoom being the core delivery method for the experience, but then a lot of workflow around Zoom.
And I think on your website, you mentioned you had recent financing that was completely done on Zoom. Is that, maybe talk about that experience and how that worked?
Yeah, so and this is, we might want to talk about this later as well, but we're closing on an investment today. That's a company that's building on Zoom. So it's kind of that Viva model. And it was completely done virtually on Zoom. So we met them through Zoom. So a lot of Zoom customers were excited about it. So that's how we found out what they were doing. Then we met with the founders via Zoom. We built a lot of relationship with them. And what we learned, given that this would be the second investment we made completely on Zoom, is that it gives you a lot more flexibility. Think of the traditional venture model. Traditional venture model, every partner meets on a Monday and you have those long Monday meetings where companies come in and pitch and they have to travel to your office. It's like, why do they have to come to my office if they're just going to deliver a pitch? That pitch can be done on like a Wednesday at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. from wherever people are. And then if you're excited and you want to build a deeper relationship, that's when you might want to spend more time on Zoom, plus potentially go for a walk with that person. But the pitches can be done on Zoom. We discovered that, and that was a big aha moment, because that shows us that we shouldn't be just thinking about this Monday cycles for a venture firm. And then we started experimenting with different Zoom formats. So right now, you see my upper torso and you see my head. So that's on purpose, but sometimes people are just like this. And you just see the head. And that is intimidating. The excess reaction. Then the other thing is like I can lean back and just you see my legs, relax. You see how my hands move, and that creates a much more relaxed interaction. Then I turn off my self view. I don't have my view on Zoom because what we figured out is that people have this vanity, narcissistic approach, and they are splitting their attention. I'm watching you, but I'm also, it's like, but then if you turn it off, it's like you're meeting someone in person. So you're not obsessed with how you look. Then you're a lot more relaxed and you're a lot more in the moment. So that's why I believe that Zoom will enable us to have better meetings than in person, because it's going to help us relax. It's going to help us do more and better. And it's going to start pushing all that information that's going to help us ask the right question. I'm interviewing a person. And the system should tell me, it's like, oh, you asked this question. This was the response. Based on this person's LinkedIn profile, there's some inconsistency. Double click there. Wouldn't that be awesome? But then you don't have the biases. It's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
technology helping you make the right
yeah,
decision,
yeah.
and the technology helping humans do what they are best at, which is interacting with other people rather than taking notes and trying to multitask.